The Bridge Between, a Pale Ring short story. Written and narrated by Brian McKee for the Rangers Grove March 2024 Art and Writing Prompt. Part 1. As Antu Kiratas stared into the lioness's mouth, he was given a terrifyingly intimate view of her sharp teeth. Points of enamel emerged from healthy pink gums, slathered in spittle, each one capable of making short work of his tender flesh. A drawn-out breath washed over his face, warm and thick with the lingering smell of digesting meat and accompanied by a low growl. On any other occasion, the young krauven might have felt intimidated. As this was his spunky little sister Muri, however, he felt only annoyed. "Stop yawning in my face!" Antu groaned, pressing the tip of a clawed avian finger against Muri's soft, moist nose and pushing her away. "Then stop ignoring me!" Muri snapped back, her tail lashing behind her in a display of irritation. "Muri, I'm trying to read, and I'm trying to talk to you. Yawning in my face is not talking to me." "I guess not. Got your attention, though, didn't it, Featherhead?" Antu ran a hand down his beak. It was always like this with her. No matter where they were or what they were doing, Muri found a way to annoy him. He supposed it was her job as his little sister, even if their relationship was not one of mutual blood. Antu was a krauven, raven folk. His body was covered in feathers as black as night, save for a thin crest of red atop his head. His feathers terminated around his wrists and ankles, transitioning to leathery wrinkled skin as black as obsidian, his fingers and toes tipped with sharp talons. He was the spitting image of every other krauven in town. Muri was nothing like him, in appearance or mannerisms. Being a ry'thar, she stood almost a foot taller than Antu, despite being a year younger. Her body, covered in a short coat of coarse, dense, dusty brown fur, was packed with rippling knots of muscle that could pull him apart with ease. A mane of dark brown dreadlocks hung around her shoulders and face, accented by fierce yellow eyes. The two sat under the cover of a gazebo made of chiseled wood and woven leaves at the base of Wysene's only verwood tree, a towering monolith of wood reaching hundreds of feet into the air, its trunk covered in neatly maintained patches of colorful moss, mushrooms, and other rootless growths. The tree easily pierced through the otherwise impenetrable canopy of the Jethican jungle, host to dozens of family homes built onto and into the bark. Lamps of colored paper dangled off ropes and vines, providing light here where the sun and ring light rarely reached. Antu breathed it all in for a moment. Not far away, a few other krauven children were running around playing a game of tag. Antu watched as one of them tripped over the tail feathers of his friend and toppled to the earth. The children laughed, rolling around in the grass for a moment. "They're having fun," Muri noted quietly. Antu nodded, then looked down at the book open in his lap. It was only a moment before Muri was yawning in his face again. "Muri!" Antu exclaimed, though he couldn't stifle a laugh this time as he playfully shoved his sister back and off of him. "Cut it out!" Muri snickered, her voice cracking with an adorable squeak, and leaned close to Antu's face again. "Nah, not until you stop ignoring me," she declared before looking down at his book. "What are you reading, anyway?" "A book. Yeah, I think I figured that part out, dummy." Antu rolled his eyes, then shifted to better show the book to her. "It's the journal of some old explorer. It's about local legends and stuff. Dad let me borrow it to help with my reading studies." Muri wrinkled up her nose. "Local legends, huh? So boring stuff." Antu held the book up to his chest and pointed his beak at the sky. I'll have you know that these local legends are not boring. They are, in fact, very interesting. Do any of them involve beating things up? Antu leveled a flat look at Muri. He opened his beak to proudly declare that, no, his book had nothing so base and barbaric as violence in it. But then he clacked it shut and remembered that he'd been reading it for maybe 15 minutes. So he shrugged. I don't know. Muri grinned. Cool. Antu blinked, then cawed in alarm as Muri effortlessly swiped the book out of his hands. She stuck her tongue out at him, then broke into a full sprint the other way. It took Antu a second to process what happened before he found his voice. What the? Hey, Muri! He protested, chasing after the unrepentant ry'thar as she went briskly running for the cover of Wysene's verwood. That's not yours! It's Dad's! Give it back! If you damage it, you're gonna be in so much trouble! Muri spun around to pull her eyelid and blow a raspberry at him. You want it back? Come catch me then! You are such a butt! Antu yelled. But any malice his words conveyed was swiftly undermined, as he broke out into a series of laughs that mirrored his sister's. He did mean it when he said she would get into trouble if the book got damaged. But he knew Muri well enough to know that probably wasn't going to happen. The operative word in that sentence being probably. Of course, he was no match for Muri's athleticism. Her body was built for the chase, while his was not. She outpaced him every time they played around like this, and today would be no different. Not that he would change a thing about it. Despite his moaning and complaining, this was simply their way. I'm gonna tie your tail into knots, he called in playful warning as he chased Muri around one of the larger roots of the verwood rising out of the grassy earth. And stick flowers in your hair! Try it, Featherhead! Muri called back at him. Antu rounded the root and spied her up ahead. She was crouched and ready to jump onto the tree trunk. Antu picked up the pace, grunting with strain. If she got her claws into that wood, the chase would be well and truly over. He wouldn't get his book back until she got bored, and even then she'd tease him about it all day. As always, he was too slow. Muri leapt up, claws outstretching from her free hand to latch into the wood. Today, however, she would be too slow too. A word in a language foreign to both of them echoed through the air, accompanied by a stream of silver light. Muri yelped as the light encased her and held her in midair. The book fell from her hands, only to be caught in the same silver light just before it could hit the earth. Antu came to a stop, his heart skipping a beat. Muri shared the sentiment, if the way she shrunk in place was any indication. Uh-oh. Elder Nata emerged from a nearby doorway carved into the side of the tree, her aged and weathered feathers wrinkling with an amused smirk. She was another krauven, but far older than Antu or Muri, old enough that her feathers were fraying and silver at the tips. Picking on your big brother again, Muri? She asked, lifting her hand to reveal her ringstone. It was about the size of an orange and hummed with the power suspending Muri and the book. We were just playing, Muri pouted, curling into an indignant ball and blowing out an annoyed puff. I wasn't being mean this time, honest. Nata raised an eyebrow. Not any meaner than usual. That's better. Nata laughed, lightly depositing Muri back down on the ground. The book, however, drifted over to float in front of the elder. She flipped it open with a curious hum, and the sparkle in her eye became one of nostalgia. Oh, goodness. I haven't seen this book in some time. Antu perked up in surprise. You know it? He asked. Nata nodded, idly flipping through the pages.
I do. It's a very interesting read. I take it your father loaned it to you?
Antu bowed his head.
Yes, Elder. To help me learn how to read Common.
Nata's smile widened.
I see. How thoughtful of him,
she said sweetly.
Did old Yato tell you who wrote this, dearie?
Antu shook his head.
No. Just some explorer from up north. It talks all about local legend and folklore and stuff.
Muri made a choking sound.
That it does,
Nata confirmed, ignoring Muri's remark before giving the book another once-over. She nodded as if satisfied with a work of art before gently passing it into Antu's waiting hands.
His name was Philip. He was a gangly man, but well-spoken and oh, so charming. And daring, too.
Muri had looked about ready to wander off, her face contorting with frustration. But upon hearing that last bit, she raised an ear and turned to the elder.
Daring?
Nata's grin widened.
Yes, very daring. Perhaps even to the point of being a little stupid. He rarely heeded warnings when starting expeditions. Oh, the dangers that fool faced. Traps tucked away in the old ruins. Guardian spirits protecting ancient ritual sites. Hordes of renegade yellow scales, all while cutting through the dense jungle underbrush, contending with the local wildlife and all the little poisons that hide in the moss. On and on he went, swiping away with his sword and taking notes of every little thing, heedless, dauntless, and remarkably senseless.
Muri was well and truly absorbed by Nata's words now. A rare sight indeed, Antu noted.
Wow. This Philip dork sounds like my kind of guy.
Antu also found the story intriguing, but for a different reason. He clacked his beak, lending emphasis to his words.
Elder, you seem to know an awful lot about this man. Did you know him?
Nata laughed, her voice crackling with age.
Of course I knew him. I was one of his guides. The other one being your father.
Muri sat bolt upright.
Wait, what? Really? You and father went on adventures together? With a human explorer?
Nata nodded, stepping forward to kneel in front of the wide-eyed children.
Of course we did. How else do you think he got a personal copy of the explorer's notes? He let us have a copy once they were written as, "Thanks for our help," he said.
She gave a merry giggle.
Well, that, and also so we could verify his claims weren't too embellished. Humans do so have a flair for exaggeration.
Antu looked down at the book, feeling even more silly for letting Muri run off with it.
Wow. I never knew that. What kind of adventures did you go on?
Muri leaned forward like an attentive student for once.
What kind of things did you do? Did you slay any big monsters? Did you delve into Auriun ruins? Oh, did you meet the dragon?
Nata rolled her eyes and pressed the tip of her talon against Muri's lips, silencing her before she could work herself up any further.
Easy now, child. All of our adventures are in that book,
she said with a wink and a nod toward Antu.
Ask nicely, and I'm sure your brother will let you borrow it once he's done with it.
Muri's eyes crossed as the talon touched her lips, and then she growled in annoyance as it retracted. She turned to Antu, her whiskers twitching.
I'm gonna read that. Sure. How about I let you borrow it after dinner tonight? Deal.
Nata hummed quietly, enjoying the playful energy the siblings gave off. She let out a wistful sigh.
to be young again.
Somewhere off in the distance, a shrill whistle cut through the air, echoing between the trees like the keening of a ghost, signaling the imminent end of short night. Nata looked up, her eyes narrowing.
The light will return in a moment,
she said before tucking her ringstone away and nodding to the children.
Come along. Break time is over.
Muri ran a hand over her face.
Oh, come on,
she groaned.
Just when I was starting to enjoy myself.
Antu pat her shoulder.
We'll have time later.
Muri snorted.
We had better.
The rest of the day passed by in a pleasant, if uninteresting, blur. Antu and Muri followed Nata back down into the study hall alongside the rest of Waisane's youth. There in that underground chamber, surrounded by coiling roots and colored lamps, she told them stories of Aurivir's history. Antu listened attentively, taking diligent notes and asking plenty of questions. Muri, however, didn't say a word. She just existed beside him, quiet and bored. She barely seemed to pay any attention, her eyes wandering about to stare at everyone else more often than not. Antu occasionally caught her scratching doodles into the floor next to her cushion. She was surprisingly good at it, he noticed, but still he had to stop her each time. As if by magic, Muri was back to her usual self the moment they were free to go home, boisterous and rambunctious. She challenged Antu to race her to their house. It was about a third of the way up the tree, a pretty significant run. Still, Antu agreed, and predictably he lost. Not that he minded. Muri was the competitive one, and the grin waiting for him when he finally caught up was reward enough for the workout. Naturally, Antu was a fountain of questions once they sat down with their father for dinner a few hours later. But much to the surprise of everyone, Muri was even more curious than her brother.
You never told us you were an adventurer,
she declared the moment her rump was settled into her cushion. She slammed her hands down on the table with enough force to make her bowl of dried meat jump. Yato startled with a squawk and frowned at her. Nata told you about that, didn't she? He asked, already bracing himself for the imminent onslaught.
Yep,
Muri said, leaning across the table and pointing at her adoptive father.
You went on cool adventures and stuff. Why didn't you ever tell me?
Antu raised his hand.
Or me. This ain't about you.
Antu whined.
Hey!
Yato shook his head with an exasperated chuckle. I never said anything because I never thought it was important. I wasn't an adventurer full-time. I was just helping a foreign friend do some exploring in my youth, nothing more. A bit of thrill-seeking before I figured out that I am, in fact, mortal.
But surely you've got good stories,
Muri pressed.
Antu's gonna let me borrow the book tonight, but you were there yourself, so come on, tell us a good one.
Yato looked off to one side. Well, I don't know if I'm cut out for that. I'm not much of a storyteller. Muri pouted at him. And then she started purring.
Dad, she's cheating again,
Antu pointed out. I am aware of that, Antu. Yato groaned, screwing his eyes shut. Muri's eyes got big. Yato clacked his beak. Stop it. Muri purred louder. A few seconds passed before Yato sighed, admitting defeat. He dropped his face into his hands. You're not going to let this go, are you? Muri shook her head.
Nope.
Yato sighed in resignation and leaned forward across the table. Oh, all right, fine, I'll tell you a story. But you'd better be eating while I talk. You're an expensive little girl to feed, and I won't have you wasting food. Muri answered by grabbing a fistful of meat and stuffing it into her mouth. Then she gave him a thumbs up. Antu laughed weakly at his sister's antics, then focused back on his father. While peer pressuring the man wasn't his first choice in how to hear these stories, he couldn't deny the results. He listened with rapt attention, putting all of his focus on his father. Yato laced his fingers together on the table and put on a small smirk. Well, since I know you're so enthralled by danger, how about I tell you about the time we almost drowned when trying to run from a pack of renegade yellow-scale kobolds? Giri's pupils dilated as if she was about to go on the hunt. Tell me, she practically hissed. Yato's smirk grew, and he launched into his story. All the while, Antu and Muri listened with rapt attention. The story wasn't exactly long, but it was nonetheless enthralling. The kids occasionally interrupted for the sake of asking a question for clarification on something, but otherwise listened in silence. Naturally, it was pretty hard to imagine that their father had once dove in and out of foaming white rapids to avoid spears hurled their way by kobolds while in search of some long-lost tomb. Yato was a farmer these days, tending to the mosses and fungi that grew on Wysene's verwood. That said, Antu was not going to be the one to tell his father that his flair for the dramatic left a lot to be desired. He wasn't wrong. He is not a very good storyteller. Still, it was a fascinating story by its contents, if not its presentation, and by the time it was over, the family had finished their meal. As promised, Antu handed Muri the book before tucking in for some much-needed sleep. He wouldn't get to sleep for long. Hey, Antu, wake up! Antu groaned as a hand lightly shook him on the shoulder. He let out a groggy chirp, opening his eyes and looking up at the offensive presence. Muri was perched on the side of his bed, the book in her free hand. She stared down at him with a strange expression. Muri, what is it? What do you want? Antu slurred, pushing himself to sit up. He rubbed at his eyes, letting out a large and unattractive yawn. He glanced out the nearby window, then frowned in annoyance. It was dark outside, and it seemed there was plenty of darkness left to go. Muri hesitated, her whiskers quivering with indecision. Antu frowned. He'd rarely seen that look on her face. He slowly sat up. Hey, are you okay? I'm fine, Muri said quickly before shifting to sit down next to him, close enough that their shoulders were touching. Just couldn't sleep. So I've been reading the book. You've been reading all night? Antu questioned, glancing down at the book. He spied a thick leaf tucked into the pages about halfway through, farther in than he was. Mm-hmm, she replied, passing the book back to him. Found some pretty fun stuff in there. Even Dad's little run-in with the yellow scales. Antu took the book, but his face screwed up with annoyance. Okay, but why are you waking me up for this? It's the middle of the night. You need to be in bed. If Dad catches you up and about, you're gonna be in trouble. He's never caught me before. Antu's beak clacked shut. He squinted at Muri. How often do you sneak around at night? Muri flashed him a grin. That's my secret. Antu groaned in frustration. For the love of... I'm going back to bed, he said before thumping the book down on his nightstand and laying down. There was a pause. Antu, Muri said, but her voice was notably lower than he was used to. He cracked open an eye to look at her again. Another pause.
Are you sure you're feeling all right? Antu asked. You're acting kind of funny.
Muri looked away. She picked the book back up, flipping open to her bookmark. When she spoke next, it was with her usual bravado.
You know, some of the places Dad and Antu explored are pretty close to here. And look at this entry here.
Muri, Antu growled, trying to bat her away, but her superior strength left him powerless to do anything but read the passage she shoved into his face. As I begin my 4th consecutive month under the canopy of the Jethican jungle, I am inclined to think back on how I saw this place when first I arrived. A strange and alien land, I called it, with traditions and cultures foreign and bizarre. Otherworldly creatures dwell in the shade here, the likes of which you would never find back in the grasslands around Underbridge. But the more time I spend here beneath the boughs, the more I come to realize that this land is not so different from my own. I see now the practical uses of keeping creatures such as the veerklingers on the trees, and I see the depth of expression and passion present in their art. Though they are wildly different in appearance from what you may find in an Emiran or Galathan painting, the underlying principle is the same. Today, my guides and I set out for the old Auriun ruins near the village of Waisune. According to my guides, Waisune was originally founded so that explorers picking through the ruins would have a base of operations nearby. However, the ruins proved to be short on relics and artifacts, and so the expedition swiftly came to an end. I am not one to dismiss an Auriun ruin just because it has already been explored, however. Those ancient people were nothing if not meticulous with their secrets, and those who came before may likely have missed something. And even if there is nothing new to be found, the first-hand experience shall be a reward enough, I think. We set off at sunrise. Antu clacked his beak.
Okay, so?
Muri was grinning at him.
The Auriun ruins, near Waisune. Doesn't that sound cool to you? I mean, sure.
Antu shrugged, conceding the point.
But I don't know why you're waking me up to talk to me about it.
Muri's grin faded, and she slapped a hand to her face.
You are so slow on the uptake, you know that?
She asked in irritation of her own.
I'm half asleep,
Antu protested.
I'm not gonna be spouting poetry when I'm so groggy.
Muri rolled her eyes and hopped off the bed. She rested her chin on the mattress, her tail swishing around behind her.
Whatever. Look, I came here because I want to go and explore those old ruins myself, and I want you to come with me.
Antu had been annoyed, bothered, sleepy, and ready to be done with this whole conversation the entire time it had been happening. But the moment Muri spoke those words, he felt wide awake. He sat upright, throwing off his blankets as a surge of alarm shot through him.
You what?
He exclaimed.
Muri, are you stupid? Children are forbidden from entering those ruins because they're dangerous.
Muri scoffed.
Oh, please. It's less than an hour's walk outside of town, and you read the journal. It's been picked clean for ages. There's not gonna be anything there. And besides, what the elders don't know isn't gonna hurt them, eh? Muri, you are stupid,
Antu stressed, pressing his hands together for emphasis.
I know you like exciting stuff, but the Aurians were bad people. What if you get hurt? What if you go missing?
Muri grinned at him.
Why do you think I'm asking you to tag along?
She said knowingly.
Safety in numbers, yeah? Yeah, and it's even safer to stay at home and not flippantly break the rules.
The two stared each other down for several long seconds. Muri closed her eyes, taking in a slow, deep breath.
Fine. Guess I'll just go alone then.
Antu blinked, nonplussed as Muri rose from his bedside and strode confidently for his bedroom window. He leaned after her.
Wait, what? Muri, don't you dare! What are you gonna do about it, huh?
Muri asked, but she did not turn to face him.
You can't catch me, you know. I can tell Dad.
Muri glanced back at him, her eyes practically glowing as they caught the low ring light from outside.
You wouldn't.
Antu opened his mouth to claim he absolutely would because it was true. But something stopped him. The longer this conversation went on, and the more awake he became, the more he was starting to realize something. Muri was tense. Her shoulders were hunched up, and the way her tail moved was stiff and uncomfortable. And there was something in her face, too. Muri had a very expressive face, easy to read even at the worst of times. And Antu could tell that there was something off in it tonight. Something was wrong. Moving slowly, Antu stood and crossed the room to be next to her.
What is this really about?
He finally asked, reaching a hand out to her.
You're acting weird.
Muri looked away, hiding her face behind her dreadlocks. She crossed her arms over her chest.
No, I'm not,
she said defiantly.
I'm just bored, I can't sleep, and that story has me all amped up. I want to go out and have some fun. And I want to have that fun with my big brother, that's all there is to it.
She turned to face him, planting her fists on her hips.
But if you would rather just snooze and let me go out there all on my own, then fine.
Antu was dumbstruck. He immediately pieced together what she was doing. The krauven were nothing if not insightful. She was manipulating him. Of that there could be no question. Abusing his desire to keep her safe to strong-arm him into following her. The question was, why? She was rambunctious and undisciplined, yes, but this was a new low. What could spur her to go to such lengths?
Only one way to find out,
he decided. Besides, it's not like he could talk her out of it. Once Muri got an idea in her head, there was no talking her out of it. The best he could do now was keep the damage to a minimum.
Fine, I'll come. But only to keep you out of trouble. If something goes wrong, I don't want you to get hurt, so if I say we go, we go. I'm pulling rank as your big brother here. Deal?
Muri grinned.
Deal,
she declared before thrusting her hand out to him to shake. Antu waited a second, then reached out, but the sneaky little lion pulled her hand up and away to slick back her dreads.
Too slow.
And then she was throwing open his window and bounding out.
What the? Muri!
Antu protested, placing his claws on the windowsill to stare out after her. She landed on the wooden walkway that wrapped around the tree a few feet below with elegant ease. She grinned up at him, her white teeth reflecting the light of the pale ring overhead, and waved at him.
Come on, slowpoke!
Antu puffed out an annoyed caw.
Sometimes,
he thought as he got to work putting on some actual clothes instead of his pajamas.
Sometimes I freaking hate her.
It was a lie, of course. He loved his sister. That was why he was going.